So thank you guys all for coming. Today we're going to talk more about digital transformation from an identity and data perspective. So hands up in the audience, I guess, how many organizations where you're working today are going through a digital transformation or just experiencing lots of change in technology? Great, and I think everyone in Optiv over here, you guys are too. So I want to throw out just a couple of statistics, things that we look at from an organization standpoint, more around data. I'll start with some of those first. So what I find alarming is a statistic around 600% of data growth over the next 5 years. So what we have today is going to grow by 600%. 90% of the world's data didn't exist 2 years ago. So when you think about that, you think about consumerization, you think about all the data that's being created on individuals every day, whether it be on your phone, whether it be on Facebook, on your Fitbit, on anything that you're wearing. But that data's got to be controlled from an access standpoint and also from just a protection, privacy, all those components. Another statistic I want to throw out there as well, which I think adds the complexity of what we're dealing with in identity, is really around just the number of identities that we all have today. So one thing that we look at from a statistics is the average is there's 15 identities an individual has. So when you look at what you're logging into from your credit card account up into your work ID, you could have 10 identities at work even. From a password perspective, some things that we've seen is they're saying average around 100 passwords that somebody needs to keep track of. So again, from a complexity standpoint, that's something that we see just going to be growing as we go more into the world of digital transformation and more things go either from a cloud perspective, more mobile devices, IoT devices, and some of those components. So I want to first, after I do that, just really turn over to introductions of the panel here. So I'll turn over to Andy to really introduce himself.
Yeah, my name is Andy Walker. I am a practice director at Optiv over the digital access management team.
Ralph Martino, I'm a practice director at Optiv, and I run data governance and protection.
Mayda Gonzalez, I'm the senior director for identity and access for Carnival Corporation, and I'm responsible for basically everything identity from a program, delivery, and operations.
And Julie Talbot-Hubbard, I run our identity and data practice here at Optiv. So we're going to start the conversation more from an access management perspective. And really focus more, direct the question more towards Andy. But really around when organizations undergo digital transformation initiatives, what are the drivers, benefits that organizations are seeking? And then the other question I really want to get into more is, do we feel and are we seeing that the risk are outweighing the benefits organizations are seeing? Are we seeing that organizations are really getting the benefit from undergoing these digital transformations and managing their risk appropriately?
Yeah, so when you're talking about digital transformation, it's a lot of different technology. You have Internet of Things, you have mobile devices, you have data warehouses, you have on-prem, off-prem apps. So all these different areas where the identity is a new perimeter kind of concept that's been going around for a while. It's absolutely true when you come to it. So we also if people were here a few minutes ago, we talked about consumer identity and experience being important along with balancing with proper security controls. So the way the technology is moving today, we have controls like adaptive authentication, contextual authorization, those type of things that really allow that seamless user experience to help kind of enhance and drive initiatives internally that would have to leverage those type of technologies and provide that adequate security layer to help control and basically expand the business into leveraging technology and security for revenue generation streams.
Was anybody in the Zero Trust panel the other day where I talked only about data? I'm going to do that again today, but probably a little different. I think some of the digital transformation we talked about was yesterday was about protecting. I think right now it's about building strategies and getting value out of the data. And to do that, you have to really partner with the business and understand what the data is. And I think that's where most organizations who are embarking on this are looking to get value out of it and derive value from that information that they have as an asset.
So I thought I'd turn it over from a Carnival perspective, really trying to understand, what initiatives are you guys undertaking from a digital transformation?
Okay. All right. So just to give you a understanding of our environment, so we have 10 different brands, very segmented. We have 102 ships that go to 900 ports. So each ship is pretty much independent, and sometimes they have connectivity, sometimes they don't have connectivity. So for the past 5 years, the business have going through a major transformation. Is based on collaboration, is based on using our scale, and it's based on what they call exceeding customer expectations. So there has been a lot of changes from taking applications and making them global, to take a lot of initiatives, agility, how fast they can deploy for the customers, and bring in a lot of the data and start sharing data across the brands so they can have better experience. I think one of the challenges that they have is that we have, for example, somebody that cruised with Carnival all the time, and he was like a gold member, and when they go to a Princess cruise, they were treated like they have no status, and how they can share that information across the brands was a big challenge. So from an identity perspective, that means that they want access anywhere, all the time. So from mobility, from cell phones, and moving into back office applications, and even more challenging, access on the ships and to the crew that moves all the time. So it's dynamic access and dynamic entitlements. So definitely has bringing our challenge up significantly.
So next question is more around from an access management, just the technology side, and programs. But how are you seeing today access management technologies and programs enabling organizations to be able to really support this customer transformation? And Andy, I'll just give it to you first.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to kind of the traditional access management technologies. Like over the last 8 years, there's a company with 3 letters that has these handy tokens. That was basically how that was done. It was enforced on the employees. It was this annoying kind of non-friendly user experience that was just forced out to customers, right? And now that has shifted, right? So it doesn't have to be that rigorous, and it can still be just as secure, if not more, right? So I talked about adaptive authentication, all those things. When we talk to our customers, it really is not just what the security is going to be. It's like, what is the experience going to be like, right? That is like every single conversation we have. In our architecture and design discussions, we do deployments. Those are things we do focus in on. They want to see, well, what does the UI look like? What options do I have? Like, all those things play a bigger role than they've ever played during our deployments, historically. And that has to do, and that's just the employee workforce side. I mean, you take it at the consumer side and your customer side, that's a completely different. That is a revenue stream. That is how you're building your business. That is how you're talking to your customers. All those things are key. And having those type of two things that balance each other is pretty much a requirement today. It's not an option.
So from a Carnival standpoint, I know you talked a little bit about from a dynamic entitlements and those components, but what else have you seen from, I guess, in the industry from a technology or a program that you've adopted to help you out at Carnival?
So I think one of the challenges I have is because we reside in security, all other security areas and projects are very back end. And I always say identity is really a business enablement process, and how we need to understand what is the user experience, what is the guest experience. So if you're trying to go to one of our websites and try to log in and it takes forever, you're going to get frustrated and you're going to go to our competitors. And how to bring that same experience that we have today, and even when you look at multi-factor or step-up authentication, we do today on banking, we get codes on the phones, and how we kind of use that same user experience and in some of our applications, so we can still have protection and security while providing a good entry point.
Great. So Ralph, since you're all things about data, so I'm going to switch more over to the data part. But when I talked about the growth of data early on, I mean, it's something I think that we're going to see just continue to grow, as we get more digital devices within the ecosystems of all companies. With the growth of data, how important is it to maintain the value of the asset throughout the life cycle?
Oh, well, critical, right? And you got to take it from different aspects. So when the data is at rest, how it's being protected, because at rest, it's sitting there, so it's all about use. It could be about encryption. When the business needs to use it, it's being collaborated on. It needs to move around. You have to put the protection controls on there. Otherwise, it becomes a risk to the organization, becomes a cost, right? It's all about maintaining its value. The business is using that data for a reason. And so you got to think about it through its life cycle, when it's at rest, when it's in use and in movement, being collaborated on. But mostly at the end, right? The life cycle, we're data hoarders by nature, right? We think we need to keep data forever. And really, that risk is going to grow and increase if we don't start addressing that problem because of the data growing on this side of the house. So when you think about protecting its value through the life cycle, you've got to think about it even at the time of which it needs to be destroyed or archived. And sometimes we leave it out there. And I mean, how many of you in here think you got some stale data in your organization that no one's touched in about 120 days? Right? I mean, it brings risk to the storage team, cost there. IT's got to protect it and govern it because the business is not involved. The lawyers have a big risk, right? Because now this stuff can be called in as evidence. So a lot of people in the organization have to think about its life cycle, what's happening with the data, and make sure it doesn't ever turn into a cost because we're not doing the right controls, protections, and processes. That's my opinion.
So from a cloud perspective, I know you touched on it a bit, but what complexity does the cloud introduce around the value of the asset?
No complexity. It fixes everything. I just put it up in the cloud and everything gets fixed, right? Isn't that how it works? I mean, we're losing control of the asset. So, I mean, the same protections and controls have to be applicable in the cloud. A lot of times we're running to it and we're not thinking about, again, here, who has access to it? What's being placed up there? Should it be placed up there? So a lot of the pieces that we're not controlling, we could be doing better early on, process-wise, and making sure we're tied to the business. We understand how these assets bring value to the business, and then we can put the right controls, whether it's in the cloud, on-prem, or on the device.
Great. From an access perspective, I'm going to throw it back over to you, Andy, too, from a cloud perspective. I think that that's something as we see organizations moving to the cloud or running hybrid environments, which we see more of today. How are you seeing organizations manage through that?
I mean, traditionally they don't physically they are in different places, but it's their data. Users don't care where that data resides. Customers don't care. They just want access to it. So when we look at it from that perspective, okay, that makes sense. It's pretty straightforward. But then how do you control it, right? So cloud introduces new complexities depending on where it's hosted, what you can do with it. And then you have the on-prem. But you really want to create that seamless user experience regardless where the data exists, where the asset exists. So leveraging the existing technologies we do today, I mean, they're pretty universally adaptive and integrates pretty well. So some of the challenges when they come in, well, we're a hybrid environment. It's like, okay, well, we go through it all, and it's like it's just really an extension of a data center, for more or less, or an AWS, or sorry, I'm not supposed to say customer. Anyways, those pieces, it really doesn't matter. I mean, the technology today has been designed to be adaptive to those things. The challenges we have is what additional adaptive controls, what multi-factor authentication controls, what risk-based approach are they taking, and we just coach them on how we're going to do that. We implement the access policy that makes sense for that particular source, where they're trying to access to. So it's going through that really strategic kind of architectural planning up front to make sure that those resources are adequately protected.
Great.
Yeah, I'll add something to that. So I think also it's important that we don't take the bad habits that we have on our on-prem and bring them up to the cloud. So we have many, many years of legacy bad habits and different flavors of those administrators putting on our on-prem. So bringing on the cloud for me, is an opportunity to start clean and bring best practices. And I think that is something that we need to be very careful because they tend to let's just do the same, it's just a different environment.
I know as we're migrating onto Office, I know that we've got new policies now about how much mail we'll keep in the mailbox, how long it'll stay there. And it's actually deleting it on the back end for us, and we really don't know about it. And it's really not impacting. But as we're moving to that cloud, we're taking advantage of cleaning up the environment as well, right? Putting new policies on there, not keeping everything forever, having data be deleted. So it's an opportunity and a risk.
So that's something I've seen. I've been in organizations where, because we had such a rush to get to the cloud and we had so many driving factors, usually the security controls, the requirements, the risk team gets usually put out of those conversations because the infrastructure team just has to get to the cloud. So how do you find from a balance standpoint? I mean, I think it's more of how does the security team get engaged in those conversations early on. But I also think, I agree, I think you want to take that time to really enforce the right policies and clean up. But what do you guys see more of that balance, and what's really the reality that we're seeing out there today?
Yeah, that's absolutely 100% true. That a lot of times when we're talking about deploying an access management solution, it's already been moved to the cloud, right? They didn't even really think about the risk and control. So it's like we have this data in Google, or we have this one in, I keep saying names. So, then it's like, how do we control access to it? How do my end users get access to it? What type of experience they're going to have? But to your point, I mean, it's an afterthought usually. That's why it's really important when you can align a really strategic program when you're talking about moving to the cloud, it's not single threaded. And I think that's what we see quite a bit. And then we're playing catch up and we're reactive after the fact. Like, you already are here, here's your only option, versus it being strategically upfront, talked about, planned end to end.
So on that kind of that same point, we talked a little bit about technology deployments and just program changes. Another aspect of moving there is really around change, organizational change management, because I think that that's a key component. It's not, you think about change, and individuals can only embrace so much change at one time. And you think about they're having new ways to authenticate, new ways to engage with customers, new ways to do business. So how have you seen organizations really be successful on really rolling out organizational change management around not just, how do we change our processes and how we authenticate access and all those components, but really, how do we deploy that across an organization? What are some of the best practices you guys have seen?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's interesting because one of the things that we realize is that unless you have organizational change management, people won't use it, right? So you have collaboration teams, perhaps the best collaboration teams, and they still will go to share drives. What they have done, at least for Carnival, is that they have identified the major strategic programs, and they build an organizational change management team. And the idea is to have what they call one IT, so it's kind of have a cohesive message. So there's major programs or initiatives going on, both on applications and infrastructure and security. But how do you bring that cohesive message to the users so they can link it together, so it doesn't seem like yet one more email and yet one more function or more training? So I think I strongly recommend considering an organizational change management team. It doesn't have to be very big, but they're focused on that communication for the IT teams.
Dealing with data, we're dealing with the business a lot, right? And we're wanting them to do something. In some cases, we want them to be data owners, and that means they've got to take on a new function, a new role in their day-to-day operations. And so I find it's big problems with IT. How many people in the room grow up technical backgrounds, or how many people are IT by nature? Most everyone. How many of you have an HR background or product manager background? Okay, so there you go. So this is where those processes that Mayda was talking about, these change management processes occur, right? When we want to change the behavior of the organization, we need to partner within the organization with the team who's typically in charge of managing culture and change. It's usually HR, it's usually training. And we want to do things and educate them. And there's a term out there called ADKAR. And it stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And that is how you inflict change in an organization, right? You create that awareness. You get them, create a desire for them to want to change, give them that knowledge to change. And that's a big piece of anything you're doing around data or identity. Anything you do that's going to touch that business, you're going to have to do that. Or even think about it from their lens, what's in it for me type of lens, because I want them to adopt. And I want them to do that, and I want them to change and not go back to those bad behaviors. But typically, ran by IT, we don't think about change management at the people level. We just think about it kind of in our world, and I think that's a problem I see a lot of.
Yeah, just to add it from a technical integrator perspective, and when you're dealing with change management, we have customers, I got a couple people on my team who, when we get ready to go live, like, what do you mean the UI looks like this and only does it this? I'm like, didn't you guys look at the product before you bought it? I mean that's that we have that conversation over and over again. And then we get to a state where everything kind of just stops and it's panic. Like, how do we make this right? There's only so much customization we can do. So the only piece of advice I have when you're going through the change management is make sure you understand what the solutions user experience can and cannot do and what you're going to expect. I mean, remember we had to overnight a bunch of Yubico keys to a customer because they wanted this additional MFA capability that they just seamlessly forgot to talk about during the requirements gathering. So make sure that, obviously you understand kind of limitations of product, what it can do, and have a real strategic goal.
Yeah.
Both sides, right? The user, you see it from your side of the house, but you got to see it from the business side of the house as well. They're going to use the tool. So a lot of times we don't have them involved a lot, and we're giving them this tool, and we think it's all great. It's the best in the industry. It's awesome. But they don't like the color. Whatever that is, you got to get that input from the business to figure that out.
So also understanding like the process, and I always say, especially with HR, is I want to know your processes that are not documented, and all the, when you implement these systems, there's a lot of, little insects coming out because they used to either create accounts manually, or somebody sent an email, or somebody used to, do something without approval. Sometimes HR didn't know. So all these processes come up. So every time I sit with these teams, I want to know, okay, I know what is documented. I want to know what is not documented and all your outliers, because that also impact the user experience. You build a product based on the processes that they're documented, and then when you implement it, you find out the ones that are not. Yeah.
And then last thing, a chronic mistake we do is with identity projects is the customer wants to recreate the existing process versus leveraging the technology they purchased. Our job as consultants is try to counsel them as best we can. You bought this technology, this is the best benefit you'll get from it, versus trying to recreate a broken process that wasn't working in the first place. Recreating with the new investment doesn't always pay dividends, that's for sure.
So one thing I think, Ralph, you brought up early on this conversation, more around us implementing 365, and that we put, in my mind, automated controls to clean up our mailbox, after a certain period of time, either that we got to that limit or just aging from a retention perspective. So what I've always seen in my career too, I'm a big fan of automated controls, more of the ones that I can automate and put in the background. I can rely on more than relying on individuals to follow the process or controls. So, what is, I guess, more from, and I think it's a mix, as well as training the user and understanding the business process in that, but also trying to automate. From a data perspective, what are some of the best practices, maybe, Ralph, you've seen organizations take to really automate some of those controls, and to take, I would just say, take some of that work off of individuals when we know data is exploding, and we've got additional privacy requirements and all that coming at us.
So a couple different ones. I've seen automation happen on the stale data, so just removing it, moving it to a different area. But I also seen it work ineffectively where we interrupt a business. We didn't do a good job of educating them. We've put a stop in their day now because they can't find their information. So we've automated moving data around before, moving into specific locations. If we find data in different countries that it shouldn't be there, moving that data back to the other country. Sometimes users just want an easy way out and they make a mistake. So that keeps the data in perspective in its movement and use and guarding it there. A lot of times the business has to email the data out, right? It may not be the best answer, but they have to, for whatever reason, until you figure it out, you got to make sure you're not breaking them and enabling. So maybe making sure that when it goes out, it has to go out securely, but the users don't always press that send secure button. So what we did is when we saw information that hit certain regulations or policies, we would automatically encrypt that for them, send that out, let the user know on the back end, hey, we sent this out, encrypted safely, no problem, no hit, but next time be more aware. Okay, so constantly reinforce the message with them, but also automating that process. A lot of it is also making sure that you can, when people move around in an organization and they're data owners, that new data owners are assigned right away, and that's been automated before, as well as making sure and enforcing least privileged. So anytime the everyone group gets accidentally put into the finance folder, taking it out of the finance folder and putting it back where it belongs. So some of those kind of pieces, we've seen a lot of automation in that.
Great. So if we focus a lot on, I think more from an employee access data that we've created from an employee perspective, and I want to turn it over maybe from a consumer point of view as well. So from a consumer identity program, when we think about consumerization, just engaging with our customers, how we look at that in the past might have been a little bit different than our employees. And I think now with privacy, with GDPR, with everything else, we see a lot of those controls that we've put on our employees. Now we're going to have to put that same type of control around our consumers' data and identity. So really I wanted to turn it over to Andy, more for a question around, what role does a consumer identity access management, more of a program, play in digital transformations? And what are you seeing companies do from a best practice standpoint in adopting some of those access controls?
Yeah, obviously, it's kind of the front line for any true digital transformation. You got to have a place for your employees to interact, and the experience has got to be good, as well as dealing with the various regulations you identified. and being secure. So first and foremost, it's understanding kind of where the data should live, right? From a consumer's point of view, there's various directories. You want to centralize data as much as you can. And then obviously the end experience, like how is my consumer going to get to the data, right? How are they going to get to the resources we need them to do to have that positive interaction, to retain, to promote our business, to grow revenue, those things. So all those things got to be taken into consideration. So, IoT devices is classic, right? I mean, it's not just your cell phone anymore. It's I don't say your refrigerator, that's kind of a stretch, but it is everything that you can interact with. It is your tablet, it's various devices. So those are the things got to be taken into consideration, how you're going to access it, what type of policies you're going to implement, and then the rigor, right? It's got to be a good experience. So there's always, when you're dealing with consumers, there's a really good practice called identity proofing. I spoke about it a few minutes ago in the last session, that point is like, how much rigor do you want to put in your customer to determine if the experience is going to be bad, they're going to leave? And it really depends on your industry you're in. So from a finance, like let's say you're in financial services, you're probably going to have quite a bit of rigor around identity proofing. Let's just say we had another gentleman here that was in the education space. They put just as much rigor as they can, so they have to kind of really understand the life cycle and who that person is. So those type of things you kind of really got to plan out end to end how you're going to interact.
So how are you seeing today, I guess from a Carnival standpoint, different access management more from your program from a consumer to your employees?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So with the Ocean Medallion, it's more of a very customized experience for our consumers, for our guests, that links for the first time with the crew. So before you have your guest experience and now your crew completely different, now we have systems that mix both. And that way, when that guest goes to a crew member, the crew member knows the name of the person and it's a more personalized experience. So rolling through that at the same time, you have to be concerned about security controls and keeping that ultimately a good experience for the guests as they log in and they use the systems. And so implementing a good framework and good set of policies that are just focused on the consumer side. So all those systems that deal with the authentication and the controls at the guest level, they follow the same framework and the same practices. Where before for us, because it was such a segmented brands, everybody kind of did their own processes and there wasn't a lot of oversight or governance. So putting good governance on top of that from a security perspective.
Mayda, from an ID proofing point of view for Carnival, like what type of rigor would you guys put on that? Do you care exactly? You got to have like intense identity proof to make sure who they are? Is that something key?
Depends how far you go into the booking. Right, so you can log in and you can browse, but then once you go into booking, I mean, we actually need passport information to pass to the, so there's a lot of, there's different levels as you go through it, and being able also to pass that data to the right authorities. So, as they leave the ports and, naturalization and so on. So it's kind of like a step up depending on how far they are, on what type of experience they want. So some of the areas have a lot more identification and proofing and multi-factor, and some of the areas are more lenient.
So Ralph, from a consumer data perspective, so we talked about the identity pieces, but from a consumer data, what are you seeing organizations? Are you seeing them tackle that differently than their employee data?
Well, yeah, they tackle it differently based on regulation, right? It's really what drives that side of the house. I don't see it being handled any differently when it's not regulated. It's still data. Whoa.
Not me.
That's never happened in my life.
I like the annoying,
my counters are black. I can't find it all the time. So, but the data is the same. It's usually being more regarded, a lot more controls, a lot more rigor. We see them now doing microsegmentation around the data, getting it down to a zero trust type of model. I know Jerry likes that. So, really regulatory driven. Same controls though, right? It's around who has access to the information. And in the business. In any business, there will be a group of people or several people, resources that have to have access to information that is sensitive. Just how the business operates. So you've got to make sure that the right people have that right access. Sometimes we're seeing it though, when it's at rest, even beyond the access, they're saying, hey, we get the fact that a DBA needs to have access to this server to do their job. By his very role, he'll be able to see the data. So in that case, they want it masked or obfuscated when it's at rest, right? They don't want even a DBA to have access to that. Or some of that data now is needed in dev. So we're seeing that masking in flight, right? So they'll take the data, mask it in flight, so DevOps teams can go ahead and work with manipulate that data. Or then now even do the masking on demand. So now not giving the data to the business, but just giving them the information. So we see a lot more when it's at rest controls around masking and obfuscation of that type of data more than any other data on the consumer side. Anything you want to contribute?
Put your phone on silent.
Thanks, bud. Appreciate that.
So before I wrap it up more, I wanted to, just ask, I think that as we look at our partners in an organization from a security perspective, traditionally they've been more risk management and the security team. Maybe first I'll turn it over from a Carnival's view. How have you really expanded either your partnerships or your sphere of influence across the organization to get the support you need as kind of the business goes on their digital transformation journey and you're really working to help secure that?
Yeah, so I think having executive support is very important because ultimately the business is going to buy whatever the business is going to want. So being able to have a seat at that table and be in those conversations as they acquire new products or they have new ideas because they need to move forward, they need to make money. So having that executive support is key in being involved, having a team that can speak techie and that can speak business and that can sit and understand what are the business needs. So we don't, security, we don't say no, 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 no. But how do we make this happen and how do we make it happen fast?
I actually read a study, it was on LinkedIn yesterday, and it was saying what's the number one skill that new CISOs, or if you want to evolve as a CISO, your role is not to focus on you've got to always stay current with technology trends and security, but it was really more around how do you make sure you understand the business and the business that you're operating in. Because I think from a security perspective, I've always been more successful being an enabler of the business and being seen as that. And I think if there's anything we can do from a control perspective, and I think definitely with identity and data, there's definitely capability there to help enable from a user experience, really improve the user experience. If you do it correctly, while you're also putting the controls around it. And from a data perspective, my biggest thing is we want to really help organizations enable them to be able to use their data. And I always say to drive business value, it could be revenue, it could be consumer delight, any of those things. And I think with all the controls, regulations, things we've got coming down, we've got so many things coming at us. We've really got to figure out and fight how do we protect that and help organizations move along this journey. I think you said it best, organizations, they need to make money. And right now, if they're not pivoting to adopt these new technologies, they're not going to be around any longer.
And I think if you don't help them, then that's how shadow IT happens, right? Yeah. They're gonna do it anyways, or they're gonna find a way to do it. You just need to enable them.
Yeah.
I think you got to find partnerships in your organization, right? You got to partner with somebody. I find HR to be a tremendous partner because, again, I'm going to change something in the business, and I'm going to need them to help educate them about that change. So I think it's partnering, right? Partnering horizontal and then managing up, right? We have to inform the business to, like Julie said, a lot of people that are CISOs now have technical backgrounds, and you see a gap from when a technical person presents or the CFO or CMO presents. It's a different business lens. And so having your partnerships, managing up will help get that momentum and get them involved.
Yeah, I think I see that from both a data and identity. From a data perspective, you usually have your data officer, you've got owners of the data, which people don't usually want to be an owner of data. I've not seen anybody raise their hand when you ask who owns the data. Because then you've got to really understand what controls you wrapped around it and help enforce that. But that's something I think with HR at the table, you usually see a CFO or something from a financial data perspective, chief data officer, chief marketing officer, all those individuals engage. And I've seen data and identity really help bring all those groups together to form that common goal and unify that across. And from an identity perspective, I think that we'll see more of that with consumer identity, where historically in organizations, I've usually seen either there's the consumer identity side, which is a whole different team and organization with a different program and different mission and charter. And then you have your employee identity group as well, which they're usually working at odds of each other. And not working together. I think we're going to see much more of that blend in the coming months and years. So before I wrap it up, one, I wanted to ask, any closing comments or best practice, I guess, Andy, you look at me drinking that water, or Ralph, that you want to leave the group with?
It really is just making sure you have a strategic. Anytime we run into big issues, it's the siloed teams that are trying to orchestrate an enterprise impacting kind of implementation, right? We see that time and time again, and when we have those conversations, it's like, we're only going to be able to get this far. Do you guys want to go there, or because they have an expectation of going here, but they really own the reach to go here or this much. So we have to just make sure you have buy-in, you have a common goal. My advice is always kind of start quick wins, build from that, and kind of take it in that direction versus working in the shadow IT kind of idea, niche type of initiatives. It's got to be more universally understood and common platform.
I would look at it from the data side of the house. I would say, find out where these assets are. Start creating that story. Start building a story. Start making sure you understand who has access to these assets. To Andy's points on quick wins, get rid of the everyone group and have access to the finance folder. These are quick wins of the business. You could build momentum off that. I would say partner. Start getting a partner in HR. If you want to eliminate stale data, try to partner with the lawyers. Try to partner with compliance. Partner with the storage team. Once the lawyers understand they have a whole bunch of data they have to defend, you'll start seeing some stale data go away. So I think it's partnering and then assessing what I have so I could build this story and manage up.
So I'll build into the partnering. So I'm going to say put yourself out there and go and meet them. Go to your marketing team, go to your sales team, go to your reservation teams, and go and meet them and make sure that they know your name. It's not different when they see a name on an email and they don't know what you do or how you can provide them value than when you sit with them and you understand a little bit more of the company. And that kind of also gives you an edge because now you have visibility on every business unit that maybe they don't have among themselves. So that's one aspect. And then definitely for us, what has worked is putting strong governance about where you get involved and what can or cannot be done.
So just to add a few points that I think the partnership is really key. And identifying, I would say partnerships on the business. I would also say with your audit, your regulatory groups, whoever they would be in your organization. And also, I would say your IT teams, because that's something historically I don't always see the IT teams and security groups working together. Again, sometimes they're at odds as well, but really, partnering with them and really understanding all of those partners' goals, kind of their roadmaps where they need to go, and then looking at from a security program, ensuring that you've got the security controls and capabilities, at least outlined, defined, working on budget plans, staffing, whatever you need to make sure that you are working with them, alongside them, and not going to be holding them back, I think is a key component. What I've seen too, and I think that, if you look at cloud, you look at on-prem, I've seen two, I call it more of a best practice, but the controls, whatever you have data on-prem, off-prem, they're the same in terms of what you're required to do. It's just how you go about doing them could be different. And so, I've seen a lot of organizations try to leverage existing technology they have for the most part, because that reduces additional complexity in your environment, but also getting ahead of some of those decisions so you're not at the back end trying to slow down a program or a project, is also a key component. And I think what you brought up, Ralph, on the ADCAR and a change management perspective, if you do have an organizational change process within your organization or an organization, really befriending them and figuring out how do you really bring them into the program, because I guarantee you, on large identity efforts, when I've done that with, even working with HR or change, there's usually a lot of positive benefits that we see because we're actually helping many teams embrace the change and move things along a lot faster.
And I'm going to say consider branding on your identity program. Yeah. Colors, logos, consistent messaging. It sounds simple. I guess we're a company that do a lot of marketing. But everything we do identity, all our messages have the same look, have the same logos that we created for it, and that way when the users see it, they link it.
So like a really cool name, right? Like ice cream or something like that.
We're still looking for that. Unfortunately, we're not that creative.
IT magic.
IT magic, I like that. So I'm going to turn over just questions from the audience. So any questions for anybody here on the panel, and it can be on this topic, it could be on anything else too. Yes, go ahead.
I was curious, you mentioned earlier when you were talking about some of the challenges your customers have faced where they're a gold member with Carnival, but it doesn't seem to reflect on Princess. Could you elaborate on some of the challenges of the process you went through to link those identities without impacting the customer experience, your loyal members that you've come to expect?
So the biggest challenge we have was a cultural challenge. So when I started in this company to tell one of the brand presidents that they're going to share their loyalty information with another, I think it would have been easier to share their wives. So it was like you couldn't even have that conversation. I think the consumer demands have changed, and that has changed their minds, and now they are very open to it. So, data sharing is very limited across the brands still, but we have some of those attributes that, like loyalty levels that are available and that they can use it individually. Now, not all the brands use it because some of them are still resistant, but the information is there.
When you transfer that data between systems, is there certain aspects of the data transferring that you can block? So if all this information here, like you said, I went through the registration process, so now you have my passport, you have all these other things, but the partner or the other entity just needs my loyalty number and my name, right? They don't need my other information. So as that stuff transfers over via APIs or whatever, do you guys block them at that level?
It's the very minimum.
Okay.
We share the very minimum. So, and also we have GDPR on top of it, right? So the very minimum of it. So just the information that is needed to identify that customer, and it's almost the customer has to identify himself to say, so there's nothing that links that Mayda at Carnival and I log in Princess and like, oh, aha, this is you. So it's more like you have to identify yourself.
Are there efforts with the business lines maintaining their distinct ownership of that data and minimizing that data sharing? Are there challenges in enabling, or is it not an approach you guys take to allow single sign-on between, say, Princess and Carnival applications or services?
So our strategy is to continue to have each one of the brands working independently. They're very different, and they hit different market segments. So there's not a desire of combining a lot of that right now. There have been some discussions. So I think as I mentioned, Ocean Medallion is going to change a lot of that. So you register once you do a booking, then you register on the Ocean side. And as we are expanding that from one brand to the other, the idea is that becomes global. Then it really will become that global user experience. But we're not there yet.
Any other questions? Crystal?
Yeah. So, Ralph, you said that we like to hoard data.
With a smile on her face.
From the customer perspective, like when you're collecting customer data, are you seeing that clients or corporations are finding they've collected too much data? Like maybe there's stuff they've been collecting that they're not leveraging, and
It depends who you talk to.
yeah, whether it's from a legal perspective or not. And somebody says, you know what, we probably shouldn't.
So the CMO traditionally has every piece of data on the customer from the day they came on till whenever. So they have the most data. And that's really for next-gen marketing. The lawyers, when they usually hear that, they kind of like, what? We have how much data from who? And they're not using when? So depending on who you're talking to, like I said, marketing wants to keep it forever. They want to, the next-gen marketing needs all the statistics. The legal team doesn't want it. Compliance needs to keep it for a period of time, right? So it depends on who you talk to.
And that's where the partnerships that you're mentioning come
Just a
into
few.
So part of the conversation that was had was for CISOs particularly being able to operate in the technical space, but also understand the realm of the business that they're operating in. So with that, as you bring in junior engineers and junior project managers, what sort of efforts do you drive at your businesses to bring awareness to those engineers of the business unit and how they can operate outside of just the technical sphere there?
So that's a good question. So I think I shock my team a little bit because I sit them into a lot of those business conversations, and I have what I call them, I always tell them during global governance too. Understanding a lot of those processes and bringing them into those conversations, I send them over to the reservation agents to understand how booking gets done, how sales get done. It takes them a little bit out of their comfort zone because they can speak very techy, and some people will always speak very technical, but understanding what they do and how that links into a process or how that links into into the company, what I say, how the company makes money. So what you're doing here links to this process, to this business unit, and this is, you link it together.
Yeah, I think it's important in any of those projects you're going to do around data or identity is getting involved with the business, right? Too many times IT is just the big stick, right? We just come in there and do something, and you got to look at it as that they're your customer. And so the best way to market to them, to get them to use your technology, is understand them and understand how they operate and how they work. So before you're embarking on those things, it is about making an IT guy feel uncomfortable and getting him involved and making them understand what's happening over there so that when you do the technology, it's going to work.
Yeah, our tendency is to kind of shield our IT techies from like the business conversation. We tend not to bring it into the table, and then we translate back to them, and that's where you have a lot of business analysts and you have people translating. And instead of doing that, kind of is a kind of a shift on the mentality from how you manage people.
And I get it. I was just from a whole different kind of angle, is just even finding a mentor or having to introduce them to somebody in the business. I've always found too, when I'm trying to present security topics, security metrics, try to get funding, anything from the business, if I can put it in business terms. So I've worked in insurance organizations, so they understand risk pretty well, not security risk, but they look at risk from a credit risk or everything else. And if I can use, turn my metrics, my presentations into their language, I'm going to see a lot more heads nodding at me as I talk, and they're going to understand that. But I think that, kind of implanting people in the business and encourage the relationships, getting them engaged in some of their, whether it be mentoring or whatever it is. But I think that's also, and also sponsoring them if they want to go take training or classes if you're working in a bank and understanding how a bank works. I think that those are always key things, because I've always, when you think about data control, if you think about from a process perspective, you really got to understand how things move through a company to be able to really apply the appropriate security controls. Is that a question over here, Curtis?
So, hey, Ralph, you mentioned data ownership, right? Very difficult to do. So what's the best way to ensure who the data owner is, and then what is the risk of an action of not being able to identify the ownership of the data itself?
So let's look at it from unstructured data, right? If I don't have a data owner, how can I enforce least privilege? Makes IT the default owner, right? IT doesn't know what's in the data or who should have access if they're servicing a ticket. Ticket came in, put Crystal in this group, grant Crystal access, right? So if I don't have a data owner, someone who is in the business that is the owner of the information, and have them start telling me who should have access and how that access should be granted, I can't do anything about it. I can't enforce least privileged. Now, let's say I'm on the DLP side of the house. The data's moving in a network, and I see that Ralph sent an Excel spreadsheet with 10 credit cards to a Gmail account. The incident guy is not going to call me. I might say, that's just how I do things. I might be an insider. We don't know. You're not going to call my manager because they don't know what I'm doing. They just know I'm doing my job, and they got 100 other things going on. So I'd call the data owner and say, hey, you own this information. Ralph just sent that out. Should he send it to you in email? Should he be able to do that? I have the data owner. I can get the least privileged, and I can make sure I'm enforcing the right in motion and in use protocols for a DLP standpoint. So having them there is highly important to just get to those controls and protection aspects. Without them, it's the same old song and dance with IT, right?
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Not from the Optiv team.
I think Aubrey, do you have a question back there?
Do I? Yeah, so my question would be, and my thought is, it's not the first time we've heard digital transformation, right? And from my recollection, that term's been around for years, maybe even a decade and change, right? Or more. So what's the difference between digital transformation then and now? What's the one thing that establishes this period of digital transformation? And it may be more of a philosophical question that I'm asking, but we've got some esteemed panelists. Have another. So maybe you guys can kind of talk to that a little bit.
I think it's twofold. I think for an organization undergoing digital transformation with a big consumer play, it's getting the data, how they can use the data to their competitive advantage. And then from a consumer point of view, it's making my life easy to interact with that organization, having that perfect user experience and just making my life so much easier.
I think it's the data is growing. It's becoming an enabler. They're realizing it's an asset, so they're digging into it to find ways to grow the business, grow revenue. So I think it is about a little bit of that data growth, and I also think a little bit of the transformations is automation and orchestration. I see just a lot more focus on automation and orchestration right now than ever before. I think that goes into some of the technologies. If you're on the panel, but zero trust, right? That's a big part of that. Piece of that. So I think it was those two aspects. A little bit of data growth. The information is now available. They can visualize it differently. They can see revenue differently. So data growth and that's.
Yeah, and I think also from a consumer perspective is that they demand more. So our consumers are more technical, and we're so used where before changes in technology come slow. Now we get, I don't know, like a new iPhone every year or something like that. So you get constantly, now we're so used to changes and improvements in technology, and we bring that into what we expect from the companies that we work with. So that makes us as a company have to move faster and provide, where before you can have these projects for user applications that will take forever, now has to be on the web and on the phone, and by the way, you need to have it in 2 months, and it has to be protected, because then the users are, I think, concerned about getting their data stolen, as it has happened, a lot of breaches. So how do you do all of that and keep it protected and keep it,
So I look at it, I think twofold, Aubrey. I think one, I think it's here, right? And we're in the midst of it. And I think that from an evidence standpoint, if you look at the amount of data and the growth that's been generated by people adopting new devices that create all that data. And I think that goes along with that is now we're seeing the privacies from GDPR, CCPA, all these others are going to continue coming, because now the concern around the consumer and how we're protecting it, making it more complex. So I think that's the other thing. The other is just the advancements of technology. If you think about before, you made one of the projects, right? You could take 2 years to implement something. Now we're in a much more agile component, but just the advancements of technology. You think about how quickly new technology is coming out and being adopted. And that's something that from a business standpoint, we see consumers, they want that new technology. So if you're a business and you're not engaging with your consumer, your customer in that digital way, and you're not offering those new enhancements all the time, I would say the longevity of your business is now at risk. So I think it's just become much more real, but I think also just the speed of it is increasing as well. Okay. We have room for one more question or not? Okay, Joe.
How do you guys handle when you have a DevOps space and a traditional situation in terms of getting everybody to work together, basically? Because DevOps is very quick, very speed to market. Traditional waterfall can take 6 months. It depends on how it's all set up. So how do you guys work within that environment, particularly with the Carnival side? You start integrating all these systems and all these different pieces. You start putting all the data in one place. Now they all have to get that data from that place, which means changing all their code bases to handle that. How is that handled?
Very carefully. So it's kind of mix and match. So some things, you go into a DevOps environment, and some things are bigger projects or bigger initiatives, and you need to go follow a waterfall. And I think the challenge is when you have both accessing the same data. So there's a lot of orchestration and a lot of synchronization of those efforts. So not easy. Not easy.
Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you guys for your participation.
Thank you.